How much land do you need to start a market farm? That's what I'm talking about. In this video, welcome to Modern Grower. I'm Diego, D-I-E-G-O, and for the past 11 years, I've hosted various farm podcasts talking to farmers about their entrepreneurial journey and how they farm. I've learned a lot along the way, and that's my goal for these videos. It's not to teach you how to farm, it's to teach you about farming, about the business of small-scale farming, specifically market farming. And last video, I talked about that subject, market farming, what it is, going in depth on what makes market farming so unique and so special. To quickly recap it, market farming is small-scale, intense vegetable production where you sell direct to consumer. Typically, market farmers grow anywhere from 15 to 60 crops, usually specializing in something, and they try and get the highest retail dollar possible by going direct to consumer, avoiding middlemen. They're a vital part of local communities and help encourage environmental stewardship and local food resilience. So if you're interested in doing that, how much land do you need? That's always a big question. It's always something people freak out about. I'd love to farm, but I can't get access to land. And getting access to land is something I'll talk about in a future video, but for now, let's talk about how much land you need, because it's probably a lot less than you actually think. When most people think of farms, they think of vast acreage spanning the countryside of the Midwest. That would never work on a market farm because you're growing much more intensively, more crops per given area, and you're meticulously touching each one of those crops just like you would some little model. You're really micromanaging it. That's your unique advantage. Your unfair advantage as a market farmer versus somebody who's tractor-based farming those hundreds of acres. So you don't need a lot of land. And there's some debate over how big a market farm could be. I'm not going to go into that gray area. In the notes that I'll post with this episode, somewhere right up here, you'll see bigger farms. But I'm really going to focus on our customer base because I own a company, Modern Grower, and we sell seeds, tools, and supplies to market farmers. And most of those farmers are anywhere between an 1/8 and 3 acres in size. 1/8 of an acre up to 3 acres in size. 3 acres is big. You're going to need a lot of people to run that. If you're just a single person or 1 or 2 people, you're probably right around that acre size. So keep that in mind as we go through that video. I only need to get access to around an acre, maybe even a lot less. Why can you get by with such small land? Because market farming doesn't focus on volume. It's not a Walmart model where we have to sell 1 million cans of soup and make a few cents each to make money. It's at the opposite end of the spectrum. They're selling higher priced products with a much larger profit margin, nowhere near the volume a big farm would be at. So you're focusing on getting more of the food dollar by going direct to consumer. You're focusing on efficiency, getting the most out of every possible square foot of land that you can. You're focusing on productivity, quick turnarounds, growing what people want, niche crops, and really catering to your market. You're not selling into the commodity system like somebody who grows corn or soy or wheat. You're selling what's popular to your specific customer base in your area. And that could be different from place to place. And when you use this strategy, and when you grow with bio-intensive techniques, fancy word. What does that mean, Diego? Bio-intensive just means growing a lot of crops in a given area using techniques, which we can get to in future videos. You can actually get a lot of productivity out of a very small space. So all of these things are what give market farmers a unique advantage, allowing them to take a small land base like a backyard, a city lot, or the acreage on the side of a rural or country lot and turn it into a productive business. We're going to focus on small scale farming. This is the sub 2 acre range. And there's some different little categories under here. There's the micro farm or the urban or suburban market garden. This is a farming on a very small land base. Could be an eighth of an acre. And an eighth of an acre, a tenth of an acre, 4,000 square feet. A lot of people live in a 2,000 square foot house. So imagine just farming 2 of your houses. Believe it or not, you can make a good amount of income on that by growing the right crops, growing enough of them, and of course, selling them all. That's always the key. At this scale, you're perfectly set up for a 1-person or maybe 2-person operation because the land base is so small that person or people can really focus in on the small amount of crops on that land base, meticulously manage them, and run it as efficient as possible, getting the most out of every square foot that you can. That's the key. You're going to sell at farmers markets, direct to consumer, maybe through a farm stand or an online store that you distribute to people in your community. You might sell to local grocery stores, local restaurants. You're probably too small for a CSA. That's just one of the business models for market farming. For those who aren't familiar, let's take a sideways tangent really quickly. A CSA is community-supported agriculture, very popular model with a lot of market farms. That's where you sell a share in that season's produce to a customer in exchange for a weekly produce box. Typically, customers who purchase that want a large variety of produce in the box each week. And on a very small land base, in that 10th, 8th, quarter acre size range, you simply can't grow a large variety. That's not what you're going to be able to do. And when we get back into the economics of these farms, you're going to realize very quickly that's not what you want to do either. You can't afford to do that. You need to go grow high value crops, not just crops to fill out a CSA basket. So you're looking more direct to consumer and focusing on high value crops. One example of this is my friend Curtis Stone. He really helped ignite this movement. We did a podcast called The Urban Farmer, which you can search for. I think we did 100 episodes total talking about how he ran his farm. He wrote a book, The Urban Farmer. I narrated that book. Shameless self-plug. So if you want to listen to it, you could hear me read it to you. And he came up with an approach that was built on spin farming, pioneers like Elliot Coleman, and he took a lot of methodology and mashed it up and put his own little spin on it to become very profitable as an urban farmer, farming backyards in his hometown of Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada. I visited a lot of the plots, and a lot of them are really small, but he was able to get maximum productivity out of them and make it work. So you might think, I can't get a lot of land. The key is, or the reality is, I should say, you don't actually need a lot of land to farm. With the right crop planning, with the right markets, you can get by farming a lot less land than you think. And Curtis is one of many people who've shown that. And I've talked to many others growing on very small land bases on my podcast, Farm Small, Farm Smart, which is linked to below. And you can check that out if you want to hear more stories from growers who've made a living doing this. The other subset of smaller farms are microgreen farms. Microgreens are small seeds, are small plants that are grown to about 7 to 10 days old. They're harvested at that point and then sold. For this, you don't really need land. You just need space. I'm recording this in my warehouse, so you could do it in a warehouse. You could do it in a backyard. I've visited farms where they do it in the house where they live. Garages. The great thing about microgreens is you can get a lot of product in a very small space by going vertical, stacking on shelves. And we have a lot of great videos on microgreens by my colleagues Seth Davis and Chris Thoreau. So check those out if you want to learn more about growing microgreens either as a home grower or as a commercial grower. But microgreen farms give people in urban areas, and I guess rural areas too, a way to grow greens in a small area. You can do it in a concrete jungle. You don't need soil to grow the plants in. at least on the ground. The soil's in the tray, you bring the soil in, you grow the plants. Examples of microgreens are people like Scintilla Farms. I recently interviewed them on the Growing Microgreens podcast. You can check out their Instagram for how they're doing it. They have an amazing story of how they've grown their farm from something they started in their backyard. Now they're in a warehouse selling to something like 35 restaurants here in San Diego, making a good living doing it. It gives people who want to plug into the food system and farm a way to grow when land might be hard to come by. Now, I get it. Microgreens aren't for everyone. They're not for every market. But it does work. And there's a lot of people making a great living doing it. So that's another way you can grow on a small scale. When we move up a little bit in scale, this is where our bread and butter is as a company. This is where we sell a lot of tools to this customer base. And this is where I think the sweet spot is for market gardening. 1/4 acre to 2 acres. Even 2 acres, probably a little high. It's probably 1/4 acre to 1.5 acres. This is the model endorsed by farmers like Elliot Coleman, Jean-Martin Fortier, who wrote The Market Gardener. I narrated the audiobook if you want to listen to that. And that is based on all of these bio-intensive principles of market gardening. We have enough space to grow a larger variety of crops, so a CSA could totally be doable here. We're focusing on efficiency, crop rotations, high value crops, and going direct to consumer. The only difference between a 1/4 acre farm or say an 8 acre farm and a 1.5 acre farm is really just scale. Maybe there's some crop differences, but instead of having on the 8 acre farm, they might have 8 beds of salad in rotation. A 1.5 acre farm might have 30 beds of salad mix in rotation or something like that. Don't quote me on those exact numbers, just pulling those out of my head right now. And they might have slightly more variety because the key is the smaller you go, the more you have to focus on high value for your customer base. You don't have a lot of land to experiment with. You have to get the most value out of the land that you have. So if you go small, I have to grow the highest value crops. The bigger I go, then it becomes, I have more land to work with. I have a little more forgiveness. I can grow more volume. So every crop doesn't necessarily have to be the absolute highest possible value. You're still focusing on high value crops. You're not that 200 acre soybean operation in Wisconsin. You have to be intense. For farms this size, you're looking at a labor force of 1, 2 to a 1.5 acre farm could have up to 8 people, depending on how busy it is. Steadfast Farm is run by the amazing farmer Eric Schultz. They're in Queen Creek, Arizona. I think he has about 8 people on staff to farm around an acre in production. They are very efficient, doing a lot of bed turnovers, so that gives you some idea of land to employment ratio. I've also talked to other farmers doing 3/4 of an acre with 1 or 2 people. That's where you have to trade off like what crops you grow. You utilize technology like the paper pot transplanter to help save yourself time, jaying seeders. So just to give you some idea of where we're at of land versus employment, it's, let's say 2 to 3 people per acre. Above that, once we get above 2 acres, I think they're still considered market farms because there are a lot of big farms going direct to consumer, going to CSAs. They're not really the market that I focus a lot on or talk about. So if you want to learn more about them, I'll put the notes up here and you can always read those, or we can dig into that in a future video. But I really want to focus more on the smaller land base, because what are the key considerations you should think about when looking for land if you want that 1 acre farm? First, location. Where are you located and where is your market? They don't necessarily have to be in the same place. People like me in San Diego, I can pretty much open a farm anywhere around here. There's 3 million people in the area that I can sell to. If you're in rural Indiana, you might be an hour away from your market and you might have to commute to your market. And this is a whole conversation for another day, but that's okay. You'd better drive to a good market than try and sell in a small market in many cases. But think about it. Where am I located? Am I in a city? Am I in a rural area? And how can I get access to land? What's available? Does somebody in my family have some? Do I have some that I can use? Is there some in my community? Am I a member of a community group like a church that I could maybe get access to land through? Can I find a bigger farm that I could carve out a small chunk of and lease it or come to some agreement with? There's a lot of farms doing this. Believe it or not, there's a lot of people with land who have nothing to do with it and are happy to support younger people who are agriculturally minded to get into business. And I think a lot of them are willing to do it at a fair rate. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to be able to do that in downtown LA or someplace where real estate values are really high. But in many parts of the country, this is absolutely possible. So look at your location and say, where's the best area to farm? Think about market demand. Okay, what am I going to grow? If you're on a very small land base, then you have to focus on higher value crops. If I can get access to more land, I can spread out. I know I've mentioned high value crops versus lower value crops, so let's hone in on that for a second. High value crops are typically things like microgreens, salad mix, tomatoes, root veg. Lower value crops are things like squash, melons, potatoes, corn, things that just take longer to grow and typically get a lower market value. So if you have a small land base, if that's what you can get, you're going to have to focus on high value crops and you're going to have to find customers who will buy them. This is where the disconnect is. And this is why I think some people think market farming is kind of a scam. They think if they just grow high value crops, people will show up and buy them. If you grow it, they will come. Well, that's not always the case, right? Business doesn't work like that. You have to align what you grow to what your market is. If you have a small land base, that means you're probably going to have to grow high value crops. Then it's up to you to find customers who will buy those. If you can't find customers who will pay the price you need to for your high value crops, then market farming doesn't work in that location. So your land will dictate your crops and your customer base also dictates your crops. You need to find that Venn diagram interlock where they come together and meet in a beautiful harmony of synergistic business goodness. When you get land, you need to think about, how am I going to farm this? Might sound like a basic question, but what's your labor force? What work do you have? What workers do you have? How much work can you do? Different people have different physical abilities based on their age, their own physical conditions. If you have 2 acres, that's a lot of land to farm by yourself. You're going to either need to get a labor force with you. You're going to need to find ways to help use technology to your advantage, like mechanize it, like small tractors to do some of this work for you, or you need to scale down. The reality is a lot of farms fail because their labor that they can put into the farm isn't high enough for the land that they have. So they don't get enough planted, crops don't get turned over, or beds don't get turned over quick enough, or weeds take over, costing them production. Things just get too much out of hand. It'd be like if you had 10 kids as a single parent. Could you do it? Yeah, but it's going to be a house of craziness. Somebody's drinking out of the toilet and somebody's licking the floor. There's going to be a lot of stuff going on that's just not optimal because you can't be in all places at once. If you have 2 kids, you can manage them a lot better and more efficiently than 10. It's the same thing with land. So if you're somebody who doesn't want to hire people and you don't have a partner, it's just you, start small. Maybe you can get 2 acres of land. Doesn't mean we have to farm it all right away. Probably shouldn't. Start on a 1/4 acre, learn how to farm, get that 1/4 acre maxed out on production, do really well, and then add a little bit of land as market demand dictates. So you need to think about this. I can find land. How much do I need for my market? What kind of labor do I have? How do I want to farm? If you're somebody who has ideals like, I really want to cover crop and do crop rotation, that's usually going to need more land because some of those field blocks are going to be sitting fallow in cover crops. Getting a little deep here, but you get the thing. This is all interconnected. We don't just take what land shows up. We're not beggars on the street just looking for handouts. We're trying to find the right piece of land that fits into our business to set ourselves up for success. Too much land, not enough resources will probably fail. Too small of land and high expenses, we can't grow enough to make it work. So getting this blend is very, very important. One thing you might think is, I need to make enough money to support myself farming. Okay, fair enough. I need more land to do that. That's not always the case. More land does not mean more money, and more land could mean less money. I talked about getting overwhelmed by farm size, and in many cases, less is more. It's like a tiny house. Look at tiny houses, how efficient they are on space. They use every bit of space in that vessel, whatever it is, a container or a van or a U-Haul truck that they converted. And they find innovative ways to store stuff and stick things together. It can be the same on your land. With a little bit of land, you can just get really good at using every single square foot to its maximum potential, making sure your crop rotations are super tight, where one crop comes out, the next one immediately goes in. You're getting a lot of crops per year out of that land. So don't think, I need more land to make more money. That's could be true, but it's not always true. And oftentimes, I think a lot of experienced farmers who consult with new farmers would say, pare back your land, farm less, get things tighter, your systems tighter, improve your systems, and you'll make more money on less land than you would by adding land. So don't think more means more money. But at the end of the day, you can pick what you want. The great thing is, market farming can be done on very little land or no land at all, like we talked about microgreens. If you had 1/8 of an acre, you can start farming. It's that possible. And what makes it possible are the methods that are used to grow the crops, the planning used to organize your crop rotations, and the strategies that you use to sell the crops. How you grow it, how you plant it, how you sell it, that is where all the money's made. Get that mix dialed in right, and you can be sitting pretty on a lot less land than you think. Once you're at a good spot financially with your farm, if you want to scale up, you add a little. You scale as the market dictates, but be very cautious going too big, too fast, because that can really get you into trouble. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. If you have topics that you want me to hit on in a future video, let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this little overview of market farming and how much land you need. Next week, we're going to talk about things like how much money you can make starting a market farm. We'll head on crops that you can grow, and we're going to take on all these topics. Again, I'm here to teach you about farming, to teach you about the business of farming, not to teach you how to farm. If you do want to learn how to farm, check out the podcast, check out the other videos that I have, or my colleagues are putting up on this YouTube channel, and I wish you the very best of luck in your growing journey. Thanks for watching. Happy growing. And until next time, be nice, be thankful, and do the work.